Shall we begin? Good morning, Excellencies, distinguished experts, honored guests, ladies and gentlemen. I am Ahmad Faisal Muhammad, and I am the Ambassador and Permanent Representative of Malaysia to the United Nations in New York. It is my honor to chair the first plenary of the day on the topic Overview of the Current Situation in the Occupied Palestinian Territory, including East Jerusalem and international community obligations. We will begin by hearing from our esteemed speakers, following which I will open the floor for questions and comments from both the panel and the audience. May I also take this opportunity to kindly remind our speakers to adhere to a 7-minute time limit for their interventions in order to ensure sufficient time for a productive discussion. Our first panelist is Mr. Maurice Khamis, President of the Palestinian Community of Chile. He was born in Piedjala in the West Bank and moved to Chile in the 1950s. He is a well-known businessman and leader in the Palestinian Club, including the football club. He has been leading in organizing the engagement of the Palestinian community in Chile with their homeland, as well as visits of Chilean parliamentarians to the occupied Palestinian territory. Sir, it is a great privilege to have you with us this morning. You have the floor, Mr. Khamis.
Thank you, Mr. President. Excelencias, distinguidos
Excellencies, distinguished members of the committee, authorities of the UN, representatives of civil society, friends, all. Please receive a warm welcome and embrace from the Palestinian community that for generations has maintained alive the memory of its nation. We are descendants of men and women who arrived searching for peace and freedom, but never gave up their identity. Our institution groups over 50 Arab and Palestinian organizations in the country, cultural centers, and, for example, the Mil, the women Palestinian Women's Association, Damas Palestinas, and the Palestinian Football Club that has proudly carried the Palestinian flag to every corner of Latin America. We are extremely proud to receive you here in at CEPAL, at ECLAC, which is the home of Latin America, where we struggle for justice and the dignity of our peoples. This is not an institutional act, it is a humanitarian act, because when the pain of Palestine is shared, it becomes a commitment. Today, we are brought here with a topic that is part of world effort, Gaza, and it has suffered from impunity. Over 75,000 Palestinians have been murdered since 23, and hospitals and schools have been destroyed. Entire families live under rubble and have been replaced once and again. The Israeli occupation continues to grow, and the West Bank is a systematic issue that seeks to erase all Palestinian life, and it is the result of a colonial project that has been exercised with the entire Palestinian people. However, they resist. They resist in Gaza, in the West Bank, and in Jerusalem, in the refugee camps, and of course, also in the diaspora.
Because the Palestinian diaspora scattered throughout the world, but gathering because of memory and identity has become an extension of Palestine. We are the voices that talk when somebody tries to silence those who live under occupation. We are the proof that exile does not erase ownership, but that it multiplies it. Each Palestinian in Chile, Latin America, or anywhere in the world carries with himself or herself that part of that land that is unforgettable, an unavoidable duty, keeping the Palestinian fire alive until justice prevails and occupation stops. From Chile, the diaspora not only preserves its culture and its roots, it also acts through our civil society organizations, the media and the universities and the bonds in the political world. We have been able to set up Palestine as a state matter with ethical and legal conviction. Our community has been a bridge between Latin America and the Palestine, a solidarity channel, but also a political agent that demands consistency between the values we stand for and the actions we embark on. In this sense, Chile has become a key stakeholder in the defense of the rights of the Palestinian people, not only because of its solidarity history, but because of hosting the largest Palestinian community outside the Arab world, but because it has started to translate that solidarity into concrete actions. In Chile, we have been able to foster a bill that forbids the importation of products from Israel. This project that is supported across the board from all political sectors in Chile. It's a historical precedent in the region and becomes an act of consistency with international law. Because no state that respects human rights can continue to trade with occupation. You cannot fight corrects himself. You cannot profit from colonization. You cannot normalize apartheid, and you cannot call free trade what is built on the pillage and the suffering of a occupied people. This step taken by Chile represents a concrete way of sanctioning the occupation and fulfilling international obligations that states should uphold in the face of apartheid crimes and war crimes. It is also a message to the world for the respect of international law. The respect for international law cannot be selective, nor trade can be above human dignity. Dear friends, we know that political changes are not enough. You need a cultural change. That's why the Palestinian diaspora is irreplaceable in its role. From Chile and Latin America, we work in order to keep the truth alive in the face of disinformation, to educate new generations, for building bridges among peoples, for transforming solidarity into conscience and conscience into action. The diaspora is not only the memory of the past, is the instrument of the future. Because as long as there is a Palestine in the world that is willing to speak, Palestine will continue to exist. This strength of civil society and organized community demonstrates that the Palestine cause not only belongs to foreign offices and diplomats, but all human beings who believe in justice. The role of this committee is precisely that to articulate that moral strength with international institutional arrangement so that the voice of peoples translates into decisions that actually change reality. That is why we deeply thank you for your presence here in Latin America. This region that has known oppression and resistance understands that freedom cannot be begged, is to be conquered, and understands that also international law is not a formality, but the line that separates civilization from barbarianism. In Chile, we confirm our commitment with the three inalienable rights of the Palestinian, were self-determination, national independence and sovereignty, and the right of the return of all the displaced and refugees. We reaffirm our commitment with the cooperation between Latin American civil society, United Nations, and the Palestinian institutions to promote the reconstruction, the healing, and justice. Palestine does not need charity, it needs freedom. and freedom can only be achieved when occupation ends, when bombarding ends, when the apartheid walls are torn down, and when international law rules again as universal rule, not a political exception. Dear friends, from this corner of the south of the world, from the voice of a diaspora that doesn't forget, we say once again, Palestine lives, resists, and will reemerge. And we Palestinians in Chile and Latin America will be part of that fight until the word justice becomes meaningful again in our land. As Ghassan Kanafani wrote, one of exile is not in the distance between us and the motherland, but between the distance between us and justice. And as long as that distance exists, we will continue to walk towards that, because the Palestinian cause, it's not about nostalgia, it's a commitment. Because wherever there is a Palestinian, there'll be a motherland waiting to be free. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Mr. Camis. I thank you for your presentation and for providing a background on Latin American solidarity movements and major accomplishments in the path for the realization of the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people. Thank you. We now welcome Mr. Xavier Abu-Eid, who will be presenting the situation in East Jerusalem against the backdrop of the Gaza war. Mr. Abu-Eid traveled from Ramallah to be with us today, and for that, we are deeply, deeply grateful. Born in Santiago de Chile to a Palestinian family from Beit Jalal, he was an active member of the Palestinian community in the Palestino football team and as spokesperson of the General Union of Palestine Students. He has a degree in political science from Diego Portales University. After graduating, he returned to Palestine to work as a researcher and also became a communications advisor to the PLO Negotiations Affairs Department. He is the author of the book entitled Rooted in Palestine, Palestinian Christians and the Struggle for National Liberation, 1917 to 2004. Mr. Abu-Eid, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Es un honor estar con todos.
It is an honor to be with you. I'd like to thank especially all diplomats that have stayed and the younger people who are here with us, because it shows the number of young people and it tells them what has happened in the last 2 years of a genocide has also changed the attitude towards the Palestinian cause. And the first thing that I'd like to say is that unfortunately we are not facing anything new or something that we don't know. So the information that exists about what's going on in the occupied territory of Palestine, everybody knows that. And sometimes when we get together to discuss in these fora, we are trying to reinvent things that are quite obvious and simple, and that obviously should also assume or give way to simple and concrete actions. This is not about retaking or reassuming a political process, but it's about how to end Israeli occupation of Palestine. And that is the key point in which we should work on. Because if we are going to talk about from the point of view of international law, I do not have to assume anything else. We have had 3 consultative opinions from the International Justice Court about the annexation, illegal wall, the illegal occupation, and the role of United Nations organizations in Palestine. And we are waiting for the specific work from South Africa regarding not the opinion, but the resolution about the application of genocide in Palestine. So it's all there, also including since 2004 the consultative opinion about the wall, what is the international responsibility regarding the Palestine issue, which seems to be quite forgotten. That's why and I want to be I'm trying to be diplomatic, but it's hard with what's happening. It is shameful to have to be doing lobby today in 2025 so that products from the Israeli colonies are forbidden. that should be a responsibility that should be assumed by each state. It shouldn't take so much work, such as an embargo or arms embargo to an occupied or a state that is accused of a genocide. From a political point of view, Israel opposes everything. That is to say, it officially opposes the solution of two states, not only in the field, but with their legislation in Israel. It is illegal to recognize the Palestinian state, and one of the more racist laws, which is the Jewish nation state legislation, establishes that only the Jewish people can have access to self determination in an Israeli controlled territory. That some countries end up assuming as if it is just a detail, but we're talking about the normalization of an apartheid system by law. This is not something that we are just assuming, or as uh, a professor expert in Holocaust and genocide, Professor Ras Siegel. Here we're saying that for the first time we have a genocide case in which openly the state that is committing the genocide is telling us we're going to cut water sources, your animals. There's no innocent civilian. And we still see that members of the international community they still get together and normalizing their relationships with officials that are accused in the International Court of Justice because of carrying out and expressing those kinds of statements. In the time that I worked as an official in the organization, there were two states that Israel doesn't want, or a single state with equal rights for everyone that Israeli oppose, or an apartheid system, or one state with two different systems. And I remember they used to say we had a fourth option. We said because the other thing could be a genocide, but we do not believe that that will be achieved. And Israel has shown for the last 2 years that they are willing to get to that point. Because when we're talking about what happens in Gaza, we shouldn't forget that between the river and the sea in the historical Palestine, there are more Palestinians, Christians, and Muslims than Jewish. And the demographic issue for Israel is key because of the Israeli legislation. They assume that they're making promises for Palestinians to get married, to have family reunions, and to register their kids, to return to their land. And now simply they were up in arms, and Israelis taking on this action in order to limit the presence of Palestinians in the area. When we talk about international responsibility in that regard, we should remember that civil society in Palestine is in danger, that the six largest Palestinian human rights organizations have been declared as terrorist organizations by Israel, and that part of the consequences of that is that they are in bankruptcy, and they're still working very bravely anyway. An important aspect is the normalization of Israeli crimes against the Palestinian people. We talk about a ceasefire. Who talks about justice now? Who talks about or all the crimes that were committed? More than 20,000 kids were killed in 2 years, and nothing will happen regarding that. That should be a key aspect that should be assumed in any political future, because there are two options here. And I don't mean that genocide can be an opportunity, but there are two options. It's either we go from genocide to the end of the Israeli occupation to take advantage so that there is a true political process, or we assume the genocide as an option to go back to the situation for 10, 20, or 30 more years that will enable impunity that Israel is looking for to remain in the land and to make it impossible the possibility of a Palestinian state.
I am about to conclude because I am running out of time. I think it's important to describe the situation that Israel is carrying out in a more concrete fashion. I did not hear this morning that Israel is the state that has had the largest number of attacks on civil servants. I have not heard that Israel has systematically attacked the journalist. More than 250 Palestinian journalists have been murdered in Gaza. Also, journalists are no longer allowed to enter Gaza. Now, all of this, I'm saying, is with the intent to mention that today, with regard to the occupied territory, specifically in the East Jerusalem, the capital of the Palestinian state, what is taking place, and I would like to insist with this, as I started, this is not something that is unknown. We have sufficient information, sufficient data, enough statistics, and it's just a matter of listening to what's going on within the Israeli parliament discussions to understand what is taking place. So the big question is, if after 2 years of genocide, are we going to actually see action taken in Palestine? In some cases, it's quite clear what is needed. In other cases, not so clear. Or, after 2 years of genocide, are we simply going to continue dehumanizing the Palestinian people to make sure that to have a policy that will allow for the Israelis to continue going forward? And I think that's going against the rules, and those of us here most likely agree.
Muchas gracias. Thank you, Mr. Abu Eid, for that very, very compelling and I think very thought-provoking presentation. I think there will be many questions based on your presentation later. And thank you also for being here and to engage in this committee's conference. Our third speaker is Ms. Arlene Clemenshaw, who will provide an overview of the international community's obligations on Palestine. Mr. Clemenshaw is a Brazilian historian. She conducts research on the Jewish question and the history of modern Palestine. She is the author of books and several articles on the subject, published both in Brazil and abroad, including Palestine 1948 to 2008, 60 years of uprooting and expropriation, and education to preserve Palestinian identity, British mandate in Palestine, and the Israeli-Palestinian question. She was the Brazilian civil society representative to the United Nations International Network for Palestine from 2005 to 2015. It is a pleasure to have you with us, Ms. Clemenshaw. You have the floor.
Thank you very much for that presentation, Ambassador. I'd like to thank the government of Chile for hosting this meeting and thank the Committee on the Exercise of the Inalienable Rights of the Palestinian People for holding this meeting, and thank also the translators for their wonderful job in making this possible. La última vez que hablé en castellano, causé problemas con
The last time I spoke in Spanish, I caused problems for the interpreters with my Portuñol, so I will be speaking in English.
Colleagues, academics, civil society. What has taken place in Palestinian territories is the rapid unfolding of a historical process that has been in place for a long time. A nation expanding its borders at the expense of the native people. Occupation, apartheid, and ethnic cleansing have developed into a horrific genocide perpetrated by Israel, with the active collaboration of the United States and its allies, and the complicity of each and every state that continued to engage with Israel even while it committed the most atrocious crimes, visible and known to all of us through citizen journalism, but also because the perpetrator has made no efforts to conceal its crimes. Since the failure of the Oslo process, the Gaza Strip has been viewed and treated internationally as an exception, a small territory at the margins of what was left of Palestine. In fact, Gaza has been the laboratory and the paradigm indicating the vision that Israel has for the region and the direction in which Palestine is heading. The 20-point plan for Gaza, presented by Trump, together with a ceasefire which is violated on a daily basis, reenacts old mandate system style formulas for imposing neocolonialism and fostering divisions in the local population, completely excluded from any political agency. Furthermore, as stated by Richard Falk, the Gaza experience, additional to its unspeakable concreteness as well as its prolonged character and multidimensional criminality, can also be usefully interpreted as a metaphor for the exposure of vulnerable peoples everywhere to the dangerous and self-destructive systemic features of the 21st century world order. The failure to bring safety and a future to the Palestinian people may indicate that we are on the brink of a new era where the elimination of vulnerable peoples and populations in enemy countries becomes the accepted norm, and means by which predatory nations with their own capitalist crisis and greed for new lands, enrichment, exploitation of natural resources, and geopolitical arrangements that follow. As indicated back in 2008 by the late Uruguayan author Eduardo Galeano, we should ask ourselves who gave Israel the right to deny all rights. We should also ask ourselves that which has been the most pressing question for the past 2 years: who will stop Israel and make it comply with international law? The participation and responsibilities of so many Western nations in this genocide need not be repeated. They have been thoroughly investigated and pointed out by the Gaza Tribunal, the Special Rapporteur, and states, and have been stated exhaustively by independent Palestinian intellectuals. What we do need is to investigate the actions of those states which have not been mentioned in the Special Rapporteur's latest report and that are not considered partners in this genocide, but have also not completely abided by their international obligations. These are mainly members of the Global South, a non-homogeneous bloc whose main aspect is its potential counter-hegemonic character. First, very early on, most of these countries recognize that what is happening in Gaza is a genocide. Second, as in the North, in the Global South, there are important chasms between government and public opinion, but they do not always play in the same way because we are speaking of divided countries and divided public opinion. Civil society in Latin America, as in Europe and the US, has made huge advances in terms of recognizing, condemning Israeli occupation, apartheid, and genocide. But it is also disputed with large, for example, evangelical, I don't want to generalize, but which has a very important pro-Israeli sector. In Brazil, for example, 20% of the population supports far-right pro-Zionist parties. 26.9% of the population is evangelical and therefore tends to support Zionism. As in the North, the elites that control large corporations, the media, foundations, and universities, they have not changed. They continue to support Israel. This means that even though there has been the largest ever public opinion shift pressuring for change, the more progressive Latin American countries, for them to enact, they still have to counter what is frequently conservative legislative bodies, conservative elites, and large constituencies of far-right and evangelical voters and members of civil society. Even for progressive governments to act in our region, we need, and they need, both backing and pressure, in other words, to act together with organized civil society. In Brazil specifically, civil society and governments have implemented measures that have gone beyond European countries, but they're clearly not enough, not only from a moral perspective, but also from that of international law and third-party states' erga omnes obligations. At the government level, Brazil has suspended the purchase of 36 Elbit howitzers, intervened since 2025 in South Africa's case at the ICJ this year, therefore, and Brazil has downgraded diplomatic relations with Israel since 2024 and left the IHRA in 2025, where it was an observing member. Other South American and Central American countries, Bolivia, Colombia, Belize, have completely severed their diplomatic ties to Israel, while Chile, Honduras, Ecuador have called back their ambassadors for consultations. And a few other very well-known important acts of economic boycotts have been imposed, and I will not repeat them here. However, Brazil has failed to comply with other obligations, and I'm taking the example of Brazil where I come from, but we could do this and have this analysis in each and every of our countries. Other obligations violate, in face of violations of Israel. First, to take the first example, very importantly, it has not canceled oil sales, in spite of demands from workers' unions, from the Federação Nacional and Federação Única dos Petroleiros, the oil workers' unions, these sales amount to 3.3% of Israel's crude oil consumption in 2024, according to Comexstat, a website, an official website. It has not exited from the Mercosur Free Trade Agreement, in spite of the fact that this agreement violates its own settlement exclusion clause. And it could still cancel bilateral trade involving technological, military, and dual-use artifacts. And also collaborate with initiatives that exist to prosecute war criminals in Brazilian countries, and they are very difficult to be conducted by civil society, given a series of formal difficulties inside the judicial process. Now, could Latin American countries, with this small example that I gave, given the lack of time, could they agree on coordinated actions such as military embargo, cancellation of FTAs, and the prosecution of war criminals who come to the region? Latin America accounts for 33 of the approximately 125 countries considered as part of the Global South. That is 25%. And 70% of Latin American countries are governed today by center to left-wing progressive governments, which means that there is some chance for this concerted action to happen. And to fully meet their obligations, setting therefore a new precedent, a new direction for humanity. We may be at a crucial moment for humanity, as many foresee, but the nature of the new era unfolding is disputed, and a concerted action to protect and heal Gaza and to demand immediate Palestinian self-determination may represent the difference that is needed. If it is true that the world has reached a tipping point, it is up to the Global South to assert that either international law, a European project in its origin, and social justice be valid and applicable to all, or it will not be there for any of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Clemishaw, for another very compelling briefing. I think very dense with information and also delivered with a great deal of conviction. I'm sure it will also attract a lot of questions later. Thank you for that. And now, I will now invite our fourth speaker for this plenary, Ms. Heidi Abushaibi, who will brief on the different measures implemented by the international community, including the establishment of the Hague Group, of which her country, Colombia, is a member. Ms. Heidi Abushaibi holds a doctorate in law, master's in analysis of contemporary political, economic, and international issues, and specialist in public international law and in negotiation and alternative dispute resolution. She is a lawyer by profession with 20 years of experience as a research professor in public service and in carrying out consultancy work in the fields of human rights, transitional justice, international justice, and in the development and management of public policies. She's also an international human rights observer. Ms. Abushaibi, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Honorables delegados y delegadas.
Honorable delegates of the UN Committee on the Exercise of the Inalienable Rights of the Palestinian People, distinguished speakers on this first panel, as well as the other participants present here, members of the diplomatic corps, of the Chilean community as well, receiving us, and the government of Chile hosting this occasion. I will be speaking here in Santiago, Chile, at the Latin American headquarters of the UN. In other words, this speaking from a region that is well known with the devastating impact of war, of dictatorships, of pressure, of foreign intervention. I am speaking from a region that has learned that social justice is not moral luxury but a historic duty. This is a region that has also received and hosted thousands of Palestinians who are seeking new horizons, who are running from war and have found refuge in these lands, such as my grandparents who did this more than a century ago. This is a region that recognizes that the contribution of our community to peace, development, and to the universal concepts of solidarity and others.
We are here joining, celebrating our solidarity with the Palestinian people. We are reminded every year that the freedom, equality, and other values cannot exist unless they are universal. And right now, that kind of freedom is still incomplete. I am very thankful for the opportunity to be here, and I would like to bring in three certainties behind my words. First, the prolongation, the extension of the occupation. Secondly, the fragility that we've already heard here on in the hands of the multilateral framework. And I will defend the judicial right and repair as the appropriate mechanisms to ensure the inalienable rights of a Palestine people. We are here not just to listen to ideas, but also to activate our right in view of this extended um, incursion and domination. We are for the ceasefire and negotiations because that is the only way to have a pacific coexistence between Israel and Palestine. I think that no negotiation can be feasible if it is not accompanied by mechanisms of justice that will honor the rights of the Palestine people. History will judge us, not just by what we say today, but what we have been able to do in reality. We want international law to become pragmatic and not to continue as a mere paper. The current situation in the occupied Palestine territory is not just a humanitarian crisis, as been described. It is also the proof of an international order that has lost its capability to respond. Solutions from the Security Council, from General Assembly, and other multilateral efforts in more than 100 resolutions have declared the illegality of that occupation and of the settlements. It talks about the modification of Jerusalem's status, and still, this is a mere declaration. There is no real uh, framework that will provide the Palestine people the capability to survive. These are just declarations. An international community must recognize its responsibilities, but it does not get to make it concrete. We have had more than 7 decades of occupation and extension of the territory, systematic going against the rights of the Palestine people, and other. The multilateral system is co author of that situation. They were created to contain and not to perpetuate. In all of these years of Palestine occupation, we see the full destruction, almost full destruction of Gaza, and we have had more than 65,000 civilian casualties, according to UN's report. In the West Bank, the expansion of illegal settlement has been extended, taking up of land, and the almost reservable occupation of territory, apart from all of the abuse and everything that is not worth mentioning here. The legal situation is clear. The occupation is unlawful. The settlements have no rights. The Palestine population lives under a regime that is clearly an apartheid, that has been stated. The multilateral system has responded, but the resolutions are still dead words. The ceasefire that was signed in October of this year shows that while the law is not applied, that diplomatic silence will continue keeping up that impunity. The Palestine people is living in occupation, but that reality is not just another conflict difficult to solve. It is a structural crisis of international law, and that's what I would like to talk about, the creation of UN and its multilateral system after 44 was born after that war. But we now see that the system continues to receive that colonial inheritance that was created in 1945. But now the society is different, and UN has been unable to overcome that original structure that does not allow it to make headway in the consolidation of the decisions that are adopted and to go from declaration into action. A clear conclusion is that the multilateral system has failed. I don't have much time, I know, but I'd like to say that the international obligations that have not been met are not only on the shoulders of Israel. We must recognize that other states have the duty to assist in view of the serious human rights violations, and we must cooperate in order to put an end to these violations. And the UN system has the responsibility to make effective the principle of responsibility in view of this genocide. Not meeting these obligations have made international law an unequal field that is strict with some and weak with others. But in the middle of this desolate situation, what can we expect of international law? I'm not denying progress that has been made and that is on the table today. We have already heard about the International Court of Justice that has recognized the possibility the feasibility of genocide acts being committed in Gaza and is ordering precautionary measures. So we have already heard also arrest orders for some Israeli and Hamas persons, individuals. But these bring in a turning point. I don't fully agree with what Eileen said that right now the inflection, this turning point, is due because of political stands of the governments that are right into this. I believe that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict has to do with we should leave aside ideologies and should concentrate in recognizing common values that as international society we have chosen to follow and that we have taken centuries to build. And right now, international law is seen as the ideal mechanism to put an end to this. When I say it's a turning point, because I say that because it's not enough, but it's a beginning so that for the first time international law may be observed but may also act. But a belated justice is not full justice, and right now we realize that after more than a year of having set the measures, still today the humanitarian situation has not been overcome. My second conclusion is that international law may be relaunched here if we take advantage of this judicial momentum in order to tilt the balance of power to go from non-occupation into full reversal, how to go from words into action, that the legal mechanisms don't remain in files, but they become sanctions, compliance, precautionary measures, individual legal responsibility, and truly effective. Call number 3 is not to leave this only to dialogue and diplomacy. When the occupying part, we don't think that negotiation is enough. We must have minimum levels of repair and autonomy, and that is the crossroads we're facing right now. This cause should become a test for the multilateral system. Or either it is reformulated or we will see a continuation of a struggle of power. The political veto, sanctions, and the weakness of the Security Council still undermine the credibility of the system. But we also find new opportunities. The voice of Latin America and the global south has risen in view of the inaction of the big powers, our region with transitions is searching for repair, and it does have the authority to recall that there's no peace without justice, nor justice without truth. The recent consultations that was um, called on by our civil society are proof that solidarity may become legal and diplomatic action. I finish off saying that international law was born to limit power. If it cannot do so today, we should refound it out of principles and not of convenience. And the states and the governments become essential parties. The Palestine cause is not of compassion. It's something having to do with international coherence. And as jurists in this region, I say that defending Palestine is not ideology or political decision. It's an act to defend right for as an element for coexistence and peaceful coexistence between nations. Thank you.
Not only insightful but very honest presentation. You've raised so many relevant points for us to ponder. Thank you. The last but not least presenter this morning is Mr. Sami Ali Saba, who will focus on actions in his country, Bolivia. Mr. Sami Ali Saba is the Public Relations Director of the Arab Community of Bolivia, a renowned young businessman from Cochabamba of Palestinian Arab origin, distinguished for his active participation in strengthening cultural, social, and economic ties between the Arab, Bolivian, and Latin American communities in his country. He has been a key figure in the organization and representation of the Arab youth of Bolivia, promoting initiatives for integration, international cooperation, and the preservation of Arab cultural heritage within Bolivian society. Welcome, Mr. Saba. The floor is yours.
Bueno, gracias.
Thank you very much for that introduction. I'd like to start out by asking for a minute of silence for the victims that fell during these years.
Bueno, de manera simbólica empezamos.
That was a symbolic way. Now let me start. I am Sami Ali Saba, the grandchild of migrants. I come from the Arab Bolivian community. There we have a migration that is much older, but that has not been renewed. We have, for more than a century, been integrated into Bolivian society, and right now we are about 50 or 60,000 um, children coming from those original migrants. We are Palestine, Syria, Lebanese, but the sense of belonging and of going for that cause has always been Palestine. I must mention that migration came to Bolivia, and afterwards many came to Brazil, to Peru, or to Chile. So we have roots throughout the continent of South America. Bolivia, indeed, has had participation in this at the beginning. The migrants were integrated into society. We've even had presidents from Palestine origin, Juan Pereira in Bolivia. We have had leaders from such as Juan Leching from the unions, and we have had other migrants such as Victor Jandra. We have had a member of Congress for from Palestine, and after Oslo, this changed. And but right now we're into this. That is just for background information. We are a community that has matured, but that is very dispersed. We are trying to get together in activities, in institutions that we have been forming throughout these years, so that we once more may become this Arab community, a community that wishes to become even stronger. We believe that the solution is indeed the implementation of international law. It's very sad to be here in this fora and debates, as we've just heard from previous speakers, that doing lobbying to talk about rebuilding when we should be talking about reconstructing a future. It's sad to be here in this kind of forum trying to create aspects. Internationally, I believe that Palestine has brought a lot of attention amongst many young people, but we don't need affection. We need to get this to uh, bring results. Right now, we have a tremendously tall wall, but apparently throughout the world there are other walls. That is why here we are calling on uh, states to follow international law, to implement these values.
The Israeli conflict is not only Israel's conflict, it is about respecting international law, international rights. What happens today to Palestine can happen to anyone tomorrow. So it's not only about the future of Palestine and only what is happening to Palestine. We wish to leave the responsibility of all players, that the role that we will all have in this matter. The challenge is to maintain the Bolivian position. As a society, I believe that in the last 20 years, Bolivia, at macro level, has had an important role and was quite solidary with the Palestinian cause. We also believe, however, that this has been due to ideological matters. I personally believe, and it is the feeling of those who I represent, that Palestine cannot be a cause that belongs to one side or another. It is a huge cause. It is a fair cause and a greater cause, not to be bought by one side or the other. It needs to be a cross-cutting cause. That is why our challenge today as a community is to be able to maintain and preserve this relationship and Bolivian government's position. After the abandonment of the PLO post-Oslo, there was no coordination. So this has segregated our community, or what we had until the 90s, which was quite consolidated. So our task, those of us who took this on, first youth and then the community, has been to re-articulate this so that today we can be present here today with a single voice and to represent our parents, our grandparents, our great-grandparents who came and taught us to be part of a society. We form part of the Bolivian society. We feel Bolivian but fully identify as Palestinians. We feel this is a just cause, a cause that must be made visible, and always under the premise that where our shadow falls, there will be Palestine. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Saba, for the very insightful and also interesting presentation. We will now begin our discussion. Participants are encouraged to ask questions or share comments regarding the presentations given by our guest speakers. We will take a few questions or comments from the audience at a time, after which our speakers will respond. This format will continue throughout the session. Please introduce yourselves before speaking and keep your remarks concise to allow time for everyone. So the floor is now open for questions. Any question from the floor? The first one is always difficult, and then it will keep on coming. Yes, please, gentlemen, sit.
¿Se escucha?
I'd like to ask a question, or more so a comment, on what Clarissa presented. And to counter what Sammy, Heidi, and Maurice mentioned, I feel that today the mistake is made that podría presentarse. My name is Diego Jamis. I'm the director of the Palestine community in Chile, and I am also the director of the Palestine Club, and I'm an attorney. I feel that there is an error there because, in general, and we see this today, I feel the legitimate reivindications of the Palestine people cannot be associated to a political sector. And of course, there are political sectors that are more solidary or more convinced about the Palestine cause, but I feel that our task, and it's what has been done in Chile, the inalienable rights of the Palestine people do not belong to the right or to the left. They belong to mankind. And today, Palestine, I think Sammy said this, is not only that the Palestine people's future is at stake, it is what's at stake is the world that we are going to live in. Do we want to live in a world that is based on norms or force? And this legitimate reivindication of Palestine, only with the political force, ends up harming the Palestine position. In Chile, throughout the different administrations, we have had a state line. It goes beyond each administration, and this should be replicated. Having said this, we can't turn a blind eye to this, and what has happened is that we lost a huge opportunity, especially in our region, by having governments that empathized with the Palestine cause more than other administrations, or like the ones that have arrived recently. So here's a question to the panel. There is a structural deficit for Palestine, and by this I mean the society, communities, everyone. We have governments without an effective coordination, without coordination with the communities, and this did exist in the past. So nowadays there is no coordination. There are no specific or concrete measures being requested from the side of the Palestine people. So I'd like to hear from the panelists. It's very detrimental, and I feel that we have an opportunity today. We have a majority support by most of civil society, by the global society, and in most democratic states, we see that sometimes it's a problem for the states. And beyond the occupation or the use of communications with the flagrant crimes against the Palestine people, what can the Palestine people do to generate a narrative that is validated and that will allow us to take these steps, which after 2 years of genocide brings us an international community that we believe could help us go beyond the international legality?
Is there another question? Yes.
Gracias. Mi nombre es Paulina Acevedo.
Thank you. My name is Paulina Acevedo. I am a reporter, a defender of human rights, and a member of the Defenders of Palestine. And I would like to ask Await. We studied at the same university, I would like to thank the comment you made regarding the press. I'm a journalist, and this position has been taken as part. It's a piece of information. I think it's related to the genocide that is underway, because the massacre and murdering of journalists that has even been larger than the two world wars is part of what we are denouncing, and it has to do with the crimes that are taking place at this moment in Palestine. We need to look at it from that perspective as well. We shouldn't look at victims as numbers, but we also need to understand that there are certain facts that constitute a specific situation within this genocide, undergoing genocide. I also, you also mentioned a fourth option of the two states that would seem strange when the UN and says the Palestine state does not have a situation of equality with the other states. It can only be a participant, but it cannot vote. So first, perhaps we would need to change that so that Palestine could participate in equal conditions. Those are my two questions. Thank you.
Question, yes, right in the middle. Yes, you.
Hola, soy Víctor.
Hello, Victor de Correa Lugo. I'm a presidential advisor for the Middle East in the government of Colombia. My colleague Heidi and I were having a discussion this morning, very interesting, and I bring it to the table now because I ask, isn't there an excessive valuation of the law? There are no questions on the Palestine conflict, on genocide, on the apartheid that doesn't have an answer in the law. In the year 2004, we were at the International Court of Justice, and there was an opinion against the wall, a consultation, and people said, oh, now the law has a space for this. So to what extent has the law become a circular discourse that self-regulates and self-justifies and perhaps serves as a means to other situations? So the Palestine state has a right to be involved in this discussion, and I include myself. We constantly cite all the international laws, but this doesn't take us to a concrete reality. So I agree with Heidi in many of her affirmations, but also I also asked, to what extent are we not offering excessive importance to the law in a dogmatic way without having significant advances to the Palestine situation?
Good comments. I will open the opportunity to the panelists. Anybody want to start addressing? Yes, please, Arlene, maybe.
Muchas gracias.
Well, the question is, why am I not in disagreement with all these comments that Palestine should not be politicized? Well, I agree. But the question really is, where will this political desire to defend international law come from? That is the question. What I was presenting was an analysis of the configuration that we have in the region and of the fact that if we knock on Argentina's doors, we won't have a defense of Palestine rights and of the law for all. In Brazil, if you go knocking on Bolsonaro's door, we won't have a defense of international law because the times we live in are very strange. We're not living in normal times. In the world, there is a rise of an extreme right wing. And if they were normal times, I would agree. We're not going to politicize the Palestine cause. I want to analyze where we can expect this defense of international law and Palestine rights to come from. Because with the international situation, with this rise of extreme right, we see in governments and civil society sectors and in different progressive sectors, we see that democracy today is being defended by the constituents of these progressive spaces. With the political configuration we have today, it's very easy to say, oh, I don't want ideologies, but it's not enough. We need to analyze this more profoundly, and ideology is part of different administrations of civil society, of organized civil society, of the representations. That's where it is. We need to work with this, and we need to understand that we have progressive governments in 70% of the region. And I sincerely hope and wish you luck with your elections here in Chile. This reality is what we need to analyze and understand how we're going to move forward so that these progressive governments or administrations can move forward, because not much has been done with this risk that we are facing in the world.
Do you want to add? Please, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. President. Me gustaría
I'd like to in the face of a question that I was addressed, and if is that about the context of law. Well, I can give my point of view regarding this discussion in terms of ideology and whether the Palestine issue may be separate from discussion between right and left. International law is a mechanism that can be used to deal with international relationships and among many others, deterrence, diplomacy, force. There are many mechanisms. But as I said in my presentation, for more than 3 centuries, we have consolidated a scaffolding that is based on consensus in the face of common values for the international community. And I believe we do not recognize the very important progress that we have achieved through these multilateral spaces with the main pillar of law until we lose it entirely. Currently, international relations are carried out to a large extent, and the most successful ones are carried out through means of diplomacy and law. And the discussion here is not either law or not law at all, because if we say no law, we would be talking about force. And I believe we would when the space in which we discuss is not legitimate anymore, well, that takes us to the ground of those who'd like to justify the use of force as the essential mechanism of international relations. It takes us to a place or a space of action only considering interests and not the recognition and the development of those common values. Today the problem is not whether the right or the left are in power in any country. The question is whether we're being responsible about fulfilling the obligations that the different states have committed to in the multilateral context, and what are the consequences of that lack of compliance. I believe we are facing a discussion between violence or those who defend the use of violence and force, and those who defend the universal values. And I insist, it's not about the right or the left. I come from a state. I represent a state in this context that defends the values in the face of any visions of those that are in clear violations of human rights. We have been in a transition process for over 20 years. But at the same time, we recognize, because of that same experience and tradition, that impunity and that action without justice only leads to extending conflict and extending the disconformity of those who are oppressed by a system that gives privilege to some and not to others. And in that sense, I trust that law is the mechanism that we should not give as causes that are given to the right or the left, such as the value of human rights, the value of democracy, or in this case, the value of the inalienable right of self-determination of the Palestinian people in their own existence.
Thank you, Heidi. Yes, please, Xavier.
Thank you, Excellency.
I will start alluding to the question of my dear friend Victor. I fully agree with what was stated. The law is the basis, and it should create a framework in which a solution should be sought and found, but it cannot be all. We hear this is a violation or infringement of international law when it's really not. Using that term, infringement of international law, seems to apply to everything, and it's not the case. But clearly, Israel is a state that systematically violates all his obligations, humanitarian international law. There's one thing that is not mentioned very often. Israel is the only member state of the United Nations whose membership through Resolution 273 was conditioned to the enforcement of three aspects. The United Nations Charter, Resolution 181 of two states, the Resolution 194, the right to return of the Palestinian refugees. And 77 years later, Israel is still a member, and its membership in the United Nations is not even questioned. Not only because of the fact of openly attacking United Nations workers, preventing the work of United Nations committees and commissions, but also infringing their own commitments by becoming members of the United Nations. And in that, I think, taking Diego's comment, because I think Palestine has a position based on principles. Palestine says occupation is illegal. Palestinian state needs to become a reality. Israel should retreat, should withdraw. I mean, that cannot be called a strategy. That's a position. And on the premise that there is no strategy in terms of what to do in concrete cases, for example, and the specific ones that you mentioned. But there's a second part to this that we should not forget. Here we're talking about an ideal situation. In an ideal world, the Palestinian cause is not a cause for the right or for the left to defend. Historically, if we remember, one of the main drivers of the Palestinian cause in Europe was Jacques Chirac, somebody from the right. If we look at the reality of some governments currently, the case of Ireland, which is not a leftist government, Belgium, that is, it's a coalition government, we find cases in which there are administrations or governments that have taken a position, although belonging to the right side of the spectrum. But we have also seen positions of right parties. The Partido Popular in Spain, they have attacked the humanity of the Palestinian people, that I believe should be mentioned. Chile, which is the largest Palestinian community outside the Arab world, none of the three candidates of the right has condemned the Israeli genocide against the Palestinian people. So if they're not able to condemn a genocide that is taking place against people who are directly involved with their own people here, I believe it's something that needs to be discussed. And I insist, I don't think it relates to the right or the left, but it's a conception of the world. When there are candidates saying that Chile shouldn't be involved in that, well, maybe that could also happen in other contexts. But when there's a genocide involved, I believe there's a real problem when we see those things. We see the President-elect of Bolivia receiving the Director General of the Foreign Office from Israel. The President-elect not receiving a Foreign Affairs Minister or a Deputy of Foreign Affairs, a General Director. I believe, I don't think they would have done the same with Palestine, if you ask my position. So I believe there are elements in which we need to work so much more, but we cannot assume the logic that the Palestine cause should happen the same everywhere, regardless of the cases that I've just explained, that there have been specific governments in Europe from the right that have adopted principled positions regarding the Palestine situation. And regarding the question about media, Israel has a long tradition of attacking Palestinian media and press. Of 1948, dozens of Palestinian newspapers disappeared from Jaffa, Haifa, and other places. Selective killings of Palestinian journalists, Kamal Lasser, Haram Mokbel, are things that happened since the 70s onward. Shirna Wakle is one of the latest cases, a well-known case, 250 journalists that were killed in Gaza, but this is coming from before. And I believe it can be connected with the latest news talking about the passing of a law in Israel of death sentence. Somebody asked me, well, Israel has never needed a law or an act to kill Palestinians. They've been executed. But that specific act, what does this show? Is that Israel doesn't care about their own image outside. Israel, that is a state that has historically considered itself to be part of the liberal democracies, and in Europe, in some sectors, a very few, but still say that they share values, with Israel. Well, today Israel openly runs against the values of that world in the case of Palestinian journalism, and the attack against Palestinian female and male journalists is a reality.
Any more response? I mean, no? You want to say anything, please?
Bueno.
Well, Javier mentioned Bolivia, and I believe it is important to also understand, taking that as an example, the moment that I believe we're in when we are framed by an ideology, that means that either the right or the left opens or closes the door, or things like that. However, I believe the fact that one side of the spectrum opens the door means that the other end is closing the door. And it's clearly what is going on now in Bolivia. We come from 20 years in which Bolivia broke relations with Israel. A new government steps in, no matter if it is a director, but immediately the intent is to look for that link. And I truly value the maturity of the community here in Chile, that I believe have handled this topic in a correct way across the board. A year and a half ago, I attended an event in which we had former President Piñera from the right, former President Bachelet from the left, and together in an event where they talked about Palestine. So I believe understanding somehow right and left are the two sides of a road, and through the center we have the just cause and the cause of law, and I believe that will be contributing to the cause.
Thank you, Sami. We'll open the floor for another round of questions, please. Yes, please.
Hello, good evening. My name is Amelia Silva. I'm a student of International Relations, and I would like to first of all thank all the people here, for also diplomats, people from other situations. It's really nice to see here young people like me. I'm a descendant of Palestinian, And first of all, I would like to say that here, young Palestinians from the community, we have tried once and over to help our people, even though we don't have that much power as you do, diplomats who are right here standing on and listening to me. But we have tried. I mean, I have seen faces here in many protests with solidarity for people in Palestine. I've seen a lot of people here who are part of other things who have helped. But my question here is how us, young people from Palestinian descendants, from our community, how can we help our people who are back in Palestine, knowing that we are facing a genocide with power of other countries such as Israel, for example, or the United States who are helping it to keep this genocide keep going? I mean, how can we help? How can we young people help our people? Because we can protest, we can help other diplomats, we can give anything we have as young people, but how us can we face this? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. Very, very good question. I think, Ernesto, you want to also chip in?
Thank you, Faisal. Bueno, en primer lugar, agradecerle a Ernesto sobre
My name is Ernesto Salvador. I'm the Cuban ambassador to the UN. I would like to thank you all for the opportunity to take part in this debate, and I would also like to say some remarks and ask a question of the panel. Now, we have talked about the minimal effectiveness of multilateralism with regard to solving the Palestinian issue. And let's be honest, we know that one of the main responsible parties of this lack of effectiveness has a name. We have also talked about the murders of journalists to shut up the community, the voices of truth. And there's a direct executor of that, but there's also someone sponsoring this that is allowing for these actions to go unpunished. Now, here we know that this is happening within the U.S. society. We see that students' visas are being withdrawn, federal funds from universities are being withdrawn, with the view to shut down the civil society voice in the U.S., calling for a solution to the Palestinian cause issue. And we know that the responsible party for that also has a name. We've also talked about here the lack of admitting the Palestinian state as a full-fledged member of the UN. We also know who's responsible for that. So my question for the panel is, how can Latin American civil society, what can Latin American civil society do to have closer ties with the U.S. civil society and thus bring about greater support for the Palestinian cause within the U.S. and as such bring about change in how the U.S. government is acting, the main responsible party for all of the components that we have talked about today, this morning. So what does Latin American civil society see in terms of ways to strengthen those ties so that there can be change within U.S. civil society to thus bring about changes in the course of the U.S. government? Thank you.
Perhaps we'll take one more question. Okay, two more questions. See, it started quite slow now. People cannot stop. Please.
Hola, buenas tardes ya.
Good afternoon. First of all, I would like to thank you for this occasion, for this opportunity to take part. I would like to thank the committee and all the representatives present here today. My name is Ayahel Hamidi. I am a student of law at the Finisterre University. My question is as follows. Much of what I've heard thus far is about the two-state solution, as if this were a real possibility. Now, despite that, facing when we know that there's been prolonged occupation of the West Bank, impact on the civil society, and we have seen the ongoing infringement of international law and human rights. So, given all of that, how can this proposal be maintained without previously offering true ways to allow for the law to reign? And as Latin American law students, how can we make a contribution to international law? And what can we do to make sure that international law is not just a symbolic statement, but that actually becomes a real tool for the self-determination of peoples, and in the specific case of the Palestinian people?
From the back, yes, please.
Hola, muy
Good afternoon. My name is Benjamin Caro. I am a poli-sci and international affairs student at the Alberto Hurtado University. I don't really have a question, I have a comment. Today, we live in a society in which policies are not evolving as they should. We live in a world in which the left and the right have their own side fight instead of trying to find solutions for national and international issues. And this would be rational. Genocide is a very serious problem. We are almost 100 years out from the Holocaust, and we see the genocide continues to take place. As a future poli-sci expert professional, I know that we need to find dialogue between the left and the right in order to find a solution to the issues we face. Ideology cannot reign over finding solutions as a way and in detriment of finding solutions to such lofty problems such as genocide. Now, today, many politicians do not support doing away with this, putting an end to this because of ideology, and that is not good, and we need to find a way to do away with that.
So we open the floor for the panelists.
Bueno, muchas gracias por esta.
Thank you for this opportunity. I apologize that I'm sitting here as a part of the diplomatic corps. I come from the University of Chile, and I work in international affairs. Now, there were many interesting elements that were addressed today. We need to recognize that social mobilization has created a situation in which the countries have taken a political stance. Now, this just did not happen from scratch. There have been strikes in Italy, in Spain, and in Holland and other places. The right government has been placed in jeopardy, and if we have a left government here in Chile, we will have to take that course as well, and we have to pressure Zionism, regardless of it's a left or right-winged Zionism, because Zionism has penetrated all aspects of society, not just the right-wing political parties, but rather in that they have penetrated institutions. Maybe some of them are here, I don't know. There may be some Zionists among us. And I would also like to urge the diplomatic corps to not be complicit to this genocide, to not align with the U.S., to not be part of the Abraham Agreement, and to be aware of the fact that the future of Palestine also involves their decisions. We will continue to pressure and to protest the governments in office and the future governments. And in that regard, I think this was a bit to respond to the young speaker's comment. As young people, we have a tremendous opportunity. We need to continue to exert pressure because we see that the murder has not stopped, the barbaric behaviors have not stopped, and it's up to us, young people, to stand up and to bring about those ties that the Bolivian representative mentioned. This is not just the duty of organizations or the PLO, but others. All of us. So, Javier, I don't know what you think about the Abraham Agreement and the future of the new Middle East. And we know, I was just wondering if you think there's any agency capacity. Now, we as young people, we're not part of the diplomatic corps. We cannot negotiate. Perhaps, what do you think about us actually having any capacity to make an impact?
More minutes for all the panelists to respond to the very interesting questions and perhaps give your final thoughts. So maybe I start from this side. Maurice, you want to say anything? Please.
Sí,
Yes, I would like to comment on... Can you hear me okay? Yes? I would like to comment on what the ambassador of Cuba said regarding what civil society should do pertaining to Palestine liberation and pertaining to having cross-cutting political influence. I'm going to speak from my own experience. Now, historically, in this country, and I'm referring to dating back to the 50s and 60s, when the Palestine occupation issue was always supported by the leftist, roughly 15, up until 2011, I would say, when a right-wing government, Sebastián Pineda, recognized the Palestine state. Now, what have we done in Chile to have the most important Palestinian group in Chile's parliament? Well, we have always talked about the Palestinian reality. We have done away with the wall that the Israelis put up, and we have ensured that information in Chile is not so filtered. It is, though, and unfortunately people believe a reality that is not what is actually happening. So let me talk about what we have concretely done. I know we've talked a lot about international law here, but I think we need to refer to concrete actions. And some of the concrete actions that we have carried out over the last 15 years have been taking the parliamentary opinion leaders, the press, to actually see what is going on in Palestine. That's very different from having a lecture on the current state of affairs in Palestine or handing them a history book on the Palestine state or what the Palestinian people have been dealing with 80 years. It's quite different when you are in situ, having contact with the Palestinian people, and seeing their suffering, seeing what is going on at the checkpoints, and the constant suffering that they undergo. So we have taken roughly 200 parliamentarians over many years. We started doing this when President Boric was a deputy, and this has enabled them to see the reality. And those people carry that situation in their hearts because they saw what was really going on. Now, during the first trip, there was a descendant of the Jewish people, and he said, I'm happy to be here to see what's really going on. It's important to me. So this individual is one of the most relevant activists, pro-Palestinian activists in Chile today, even though this person is a Jewish descendant. So that's a concrete action. Bring people to Palestine. Let them see first person what is going on. And let them see that the Palestinian cause is cross-cutting. Now, in fact, the law we have in the Senate today is supported by all of the political parties. Therefore, that's important. It's important to mention that it's a human rights-related cause and not a political cause.
Sami, you want to add 1 minute final thought? Thank you.
Eh, bueno, reforzando lo que dice Maurice, yo creo mucho en esa transversalidad.
Reinforcing what was just said, I do believe in this. We must uh, have the gods look at it from both sides. We have to raise awareness. We have to get our blindfolds off, and we will gain ground showing what really is happening. And in Bolivia, well, we have just been into the West Bank and we have looked uh, at what was happening, but we couldn't go in because we are a country without relations with Israel. We can't get a visa, and this is painful. It's painful to see the lack of concern on both sides, and also the authorities seem to have abandoned the people. We have recently had a change in administration, so we can now say that there's the presence of a director or a vice director, uh, and in the new president, we witness that the authorities have not been preoccupied in the past in Bolivia. They have not had an active role, and the community had a state saying that they would support, then that was it. Nothing was done. We have, as community, been left behind, abandoned. We must try to manage things, and we just get support from whatever we can. We take advantage of this kind of instance because here we may adopt new relations and do more for the needy. Alan, thank you. Indeed, the question is very important. How can civil society have ties with the civil society that is right there in the middle of the fire? At the São Paulo University, we created a Center for Palestine Study, and I am director of that center. We are making a network of these kinds of studies, not only because of the academic importance, but also to protect ourselves from the right wing. I don't want to create any problems here. And they are putting at risk the young people who are penalized for defending Palestine question. And there's also an internal problem with the social issues, the landless, indigenous, and so many that have a common cause. And international law should be applied. Finally, how international law? Well, yes, international law can leave behind mere words if it is applying, if it is able to apply pressure. We need political will and the political will that shouldn't be polarized. But we believe that a wider number of players would play a role, will have a role. They should show political will to apply international law. So this is the way, boycotting investment, BBS. That's the only way we can do this.
Concluding remarks in 1 minute.
Gracias. Creo que todas las preguntas.
Thank you. Oh, I think that all the questions have to do with the role of civil society, as directly stated by the previous speakers, and what is the role that we can play. Beyond a single player from USA and from North American society, I think that the most important role of civil society is raising awareness. And this doesn't just mean one state. Right now, there are more than 140 surveyed that recognize the rights of the Palestine people, and that is due to a civil society that has reacted in view of this reality. that is out in the open. We see this on TV and in our phones. There is a plan, a historic Israeli plan, and that is to make the Palestine cause something that is shameful, that we should be ashamed of being Palestine. Part of this plan involves lack of information and justification of action against the Palestinian people, showing those of us who have kept knowledge from generation to generation what we have had and what we have today. This has made an effect. There is a recognition nowadays, such as that of UK and France. They are following the pressure of their own countries, of their own people who have gone out into the streets to put pressure on their representatives to not only recognize the Palestine state, but that they also follow this cause. In the Colombian case, there has always been the Lopez doctrine, a doctrine for neutrality, but not a passive neutrality, an active neutrality for the protection of the Palestine people. And they felt that there was a need not to approve some things, but this has been lost. Thank you for your attention.
Xavier, you have the final word.
Thank you, Excellency. Voy a ir.
I will very quickly go into what hasn't been answered yet. I think that there's something at the core of what's happening in USA nowadays that requires analysis. There is a very interesting ongoing discussion in the Republican side in USA vis-a-vis USA's stand. And this should be analyzed. There are people today who are pushing President Trump and the U.S. administration to adopt a position that is much stronger than the one adopted by Biden. Then perhaps this genocide could have been avoided, but there are very important elements to understand and to see what's happening with the USA civil society. They are the ones who are pushing this, including Christian non-Zionist groups in America. Let me finish off saying two things. First, social mobilization. That is the most important thing I heard this morning here. The change in public opinion, international public opinion on Palestine, including what I just talked about in the North American right wing, is crucial to understand why there was an international important link. I think that recognizing the Palestine state is the least the Palestinians should receive. I think that's very important to start on equal footing if there's a peace negotiation. But we cannot recognizing without sanctions. The recognition doesn't stop a genocide or this settlement. A ceasefire has been reached, but it's weak. It's a mistake to continue talking about West Bank and Gaza. This is a plan that Israel has to settle all of occupied Palestine territory from 1948. And from the ethical cleansing is still there. It hasn't stopped. And no agreement with the USA has stopped it either. So international pressure through a mobilization that has pushed countries to take action must continue. It cannot stop right now because that is what can lead to the possibility to create a stop to this genocide. And as to the two states, I think that the two-state solution means recognizing that Israel won. It's recognizing that the settlement will remain forever with all of the consequences that may occur. but let's just put an end to the Israeli occupation. But if we continue with this discourse, hey, Israel has built these colonies, a state Palestine is impossible. Well, let's assume the responsibility that will come about for future international relations. It's very important not to grant victory to Israel, quite the contrary. And finally, I'm sorry for taking up your time on Abraham agreements. First of all, we must be clear. Saudi Arabia has clearly said Saudi Arabia for Saudi Arabia, not all the leaks that show in Israel that they won't recognize Israel until there's a Palestine state. And it's important when we talk about a state. We must listen to what the state is saying. And Saudi Arabia has a strong principle statement in referring to Palestine. But the idea of Abraham's agreement exists. And there's a question I always make myself. When the Abraham agreements came about, we heard about the big excuse that countries used to support these agreements. Let's stop what's happening in Palestine. We'll create the conditions for peace in the region. And if we get peace with those, then this will be much easier, which is Netanyahu's speech. And a friend from the political world may say, okay, that's good work to study in the universities, but why don't we study what was Israel's stand before Abraham and after Abraham? What were Israel's policies before that agreement and those after the normalization agreements? And we find that the genocide took place after the normalization agreements, and that the laws that make it impossible to recognize the Palestine state come after the agreements for normalization. So the empirical evidence shows that the Abraham agreements haven't helped at all in reaching a lasting peace. We must understand the call on Saudi Arabia, countries and others, saying that once the occupation is ended, then we will be able to normalize the area with two equal states. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes our deliberations for Plenary 1. My deepest gratitude especially to the panelists. Some of them traveled so far to be with us this morning. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for your insights, your recommendations, and your activism. And also thank you to the interpreters for working overtime. And especially thanks to the audience for being here. I know there may be many more questions, but we will reconvene at 3 o'clock after lunch. And I've been told that there is a cafeteria downstairs. So let's break for lunch, and we'll see you back in this hall at 3 p.m. for Plenary 2. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.